Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We have all of our panelists here except for two very important ones. They are on their way and they will be attending. But before they arrive, we thought we'd take the opportunity to do a little bit of history. What we really wanted to do was start by doing a land acknowledgement. But first, I'm going to ask everyone to shut their cameras off, please, if they don't mind. Make sure that their microphones are muted. If you have any questions, we will make sure that you have the opportunity to ask them when the time is coming. We will do that at the end of the opportunity when all the panelists have finished, completed their topics. What I will ask you to do is to click on the raise hand feature, and then you will have the opportunity to ask the question that you have. So before we begin, we would like to do a land acknowledgement. We here at the CDGM team would like to begin by acknowledging that we are fortunate to live, gather, and work on the unceded homelands of the Coast Salish and Kwantlen people in British Columbia. We also recognize that other Indigenous lands in Canada, and we thank them for having cared for these lands and waters for many generations. And we continue to be grateful to the Indigenous community as they continue to care for them in the future. It's because of their stewardship of the land that we're able It's because of their stewardship of the land that we are able to enjoy it today. So this is an incredibly important case, the Churchill case. It has made a significant impact to our deaf community all across Canada, especially in Newfoundland, for the deaf learners that attend school there, as there are no more deaf schools in that province. The intention was to provide Carter in a mainstream school environment to be able to give him access in sign language, since there are no more deaf schools open in the province. It appears that the school that was established will not be reopened. Carter's parents successfully sued the Board of Education, but it was recognized that they did not provide sufficient accommodations for Carter in school. But this has nothing to do with the school. But this has nothing to do with the school reopening. This really is just an information and focusing on Carter and how that has impacted our community. The CDGM team would like to take the opportunity to introduce our members. My name is Kim. I am one of the founders and runners of CDGM. There are 4 other members that represent a variety of provinces across Canada. We have provincial chapters that have approached us, and we work closely together with them in order to provide opportunities of outreach and learning across the country. And we are doing this so on Facebook Live. We have Anthony Cashin. Would you mind turning your camera on, please, Anthony? I don't see Anthony. Okay, maybe we'll introduce him in a moment. We also have Denise Caldwell, who is from Nova Scotia. So she is our representative from the Atlantic region. We have so Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Denise, would you mind turning your camera on? Hello, everyone. Okay, yeah, this is Denise. Thank you very much. So again, she is a representative from the Atlantic provinces. So if anyone requires any support, Denise will be your point of contact, and she will liaise between us and you. Thank you very much, Denise. You're welcome. Take care. Hi, Anthony. So Anthony is our Ontario representative. He again works closely with us. He is our tech guy today. Great,
Hi, everyone.
Hello, thank you. We do have one more representative. Her name is Trisha Marsden. She's running a little late as well, so she has not arrived. She is currently engaged with another event, but she will be joining us later. So Trisha Amaro, so I saw that the caption was wrong. Trisha Amaro, that was an interpreter error. Trisha Amaro. I am going to post a link to everyone in the chat. So this link that I have just posted in the chat is the website that Carter's parents have established. There you will have the opportunity to see the transcript. I understand it's a very, very long document. It will be a lot of heavy reading, but there it is fruitful of information. So you can have a look at the website. You're able to download the transcript and read it at your leisure, at your own time. But we really just wanted to make sure that during today's discussion, it is possible that, and if you have had the opportunity to read some of the transcript, some of this might be triggering, potentially from your own experience growing up in a mainstream setting. So we really want to recall that last summer during the hearing, it touched, many of us watched online, and it was very touching and emotional to the community. A lot of people had a lot of feelings of discomfort and anger and frustration of, why are they doing that to him? Why are they doing that to this child? And during the hearing, it was very emotional. So I really want to remind everyone to be respectful, because some individuals might be triggered during today's discussion. We do have another panelist here today. Her name is Dr. Kristen Snodden. She is a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, and she was one of the experts that was brought in for the hearing. So Kristen was there to provide some background on and her expertise on ASL instruction for deaf students.
Hello, everyone.
So this is Kristen. So Kristen, would you mind speaking to what it is that you do at Toronto Metropolitan University? And your experience during the hearing?
Absolutely, and I'll try to keep it brief. Toronto Metropolitan University was formerly Ryerson University. So just so that you know that. And the department that I work in is the School of Early Childhood Studies, ECS, it's commonly known as. And it's for people who work in the field of childcare or daycare, providing research to those professions as well as to parents. So that's the focus of the department. Now, you may be wondering how I came to be involved in this hearing or in the case itself. Todd and Kim had read an article that I published, I believe it was in 2020. And it was a paper that spoke to the Canadian deaf education and the concerns that people are having in terms of the transfer of language to children and the violence that is happening with preventing that language transfer. So I published the paper, and it's free if you are interested in reading it. I didn't at that time know anything about Carter, but I was aware of the media that was being the media representation of what was happening in Newfoundland. And so Todd and Kim contacted me and asked if I would be willing to be an expert witness for them during the hearing. And I was happy to do it. It was the first time I have been an expert witness. I didn't really know what it would entail. Their lawyer first contacted me, Kyle Reese, and I spoke to him briefly. And he asked me to write a report. And in order to do so, I needed to just take a step back and look at all the research. There's an abundance of research about language deprivation and the future of children who have experienced language deprivation, their mental health, their physical health, the stress they experience, the trauma, and the impact that it has on their learning and their literacy. And so that's where I started from in my report. The lawyer never asked me to directly assess Carter, and I don't have that expertise. I am not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional, but in general, I could speak to the issues about language deprivation and the impact that it has on deaf children, because that is my field, and I've done a lot of research on education of deaf children. My camera's off. I missed the finger spelling. Maybe if you could ask.
Oh, goodness. Kim, can you allow Denise control for her camera? Please. Very good. Hi, Denise. Sorry. Great. Someone had mentioned the audio was not working for them.
So I'll repeat what Kristen just said. So she's talking about the impact of language deprivation and how it impacts a child both mentally, emotionally, physically, also from language itself.
Did that work for everyone? Thank you very much for that, Kristen. Very much appreciated. So now I would like to welcome our very special guests. We have Kim and Todd Churchill. They are here with us now. Hi, Kim and Todd. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Great. We are very excited to have you here with us today and this afternoon. Well, I guess this morning, depending on where you are across Canada. It's afternoon for you.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here.
So I just wanted to open the discussion, giving you the opportunity to explain your experience navigating this incredible struggle and journey. What made you decide to take on this lawsuit and sue the Newfoundland School Board? I don't imagine it was an easy task. It's a big body to challenge. And so if you could maybe just give us a bit of, a summarization on what your experience was, but we do have more questions going forward. And I'm going to shut my camera off.
So when Carter entered the school system in 2016, we were very naive about what supports he would get. We assumed that he would get the same education as hearing children, because we assumed wrongly that in Canada, deaf people have equal rights. And we were naive about that, because clearly that's not the case. And during the course of his kindergarten year, we quickly realized how bad the supports were. For example, he was with a mainstream teacher who knew no ASL at all, and who relied on a student assistant who was never tested for American Sign Language proficiency, and was later tested a year later and found to be so poor she could not fingerspell her name correctly on the proficiency assessment. And we met with school administration, district staff, department officials. We even met with the minister at one point, and we could never get any traction. We had a lot of lip service, a lot of, we'll look into it, we'll get back to you. And eventually at the end of kindergarten, we took what we felt was an extreme measure to open up a human rights complaint, because we thought in a country like Canada, human rights were protected and valued. The problem is they're not valued for everybody. And that was very upsetting for us. And we found, tragically, how bad the human rights of deaf people are being violated. So over the course of 5+ years, the English school district attempted to grind us down and eventually financially cripple us, until we eventually gave up. And we would find out this year, once the decision finally came out after the Board of Inquiry eventually happened, that the English school district spent $750,000 in legal fees in an attempt to grind us down. And how is an ordinary person like us supposed to get fairness and protect your rights when an entity with limitless financial resources can just keep spending and spending and spending until they wear you down and bankrupt you? Like, how can an average person do it? We've done a lot of TV interviews in the last 5 or 6 years, and I've always said that I needed to be able to look Carter in his eye. I needed to be able to look Carter in his eyes when he was a man and tell him we did everything we could. And that's what That's why we didn't give up.
You know, as parents, sometimes it's our it's our responsibility to take on the hardest fights of our lives for our children and to support them. I understand that the lawyer fees were exorbitant. And it's also my understanding that Todd you used to have a hockey rink in your backyard, where every that would be an opportunity to have family time and work and play in the community, but that had to be put aside because all of your time and attention was focused on this lawsuit.
Yeah, that's correct. In the 5 years before we started the lawsuit, we had a backyard hockey rink, and we raised $267,000 for local children's charities, Shriners Hospital, Easter Seals, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Rainbow Riders Therapeutic Riding. And these were all charities that were helping Carter and children like Carter. So we did that for 5 years, and but it was very time consuming. So once we took on the human rights case, we had to stop that. We just never had enough time because the human rights case was consuming every minute of our time.
I can imagine. I'm just referencing my notes here, sorry, just a moment. So when you started the process, did you imagine that it would go smoothly, or were you ready to take on this long battle? And what were your expectations? Did you think that it would have gone on as long as it did? The hearing was only concluded last year, but it was 5 years worth of fighting before you were able to get to that point.
So the short answer, no, we never thought that it would take this long, nor could we ever imagine. And to be honest, I think that when we initiated the human rights, when we first filed it, we thought because of Carter's age alone that things would be expedited, because this is a child's life. This is everything with his education, affects his entire future. And the more time we lost and wasted with him not getting access to an education, the more damage was being done to him. So we always felt that, people would have, the sense to understand and realize that this needs to be expedited. And sadly, the way that things work in this legal system, and with human rights process, because in Newfoundland and Labrador, things are backed up so much, it ended up being a very long, drawn out process. And the way it works here, and probably similarly in other provinces, is that they tell you that when you file a human rights complaint, you must go through a mediation process first. And so mediation for us, we ended up having 4 meetings altogether over the span of 2 years. In 2 years, we only had 4 meetings for mediation with government and the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District. And I'll be honest that at our last meeting, Todd and I just told them that this is it. We're done. We're tired of wasting time. We knew that we were not seeing eye to eye with regards to what Carter needed to. And as Todd had said earlier, that it was just all lip service. We found out quickly that they would tell us in meetings one thing and then follow up later with a letter stating something different. And game that we felt was being played with Carter's life. And it got to a point that we said we had enough. And we said, we're going to go full distance with this, and take it to a hearing, a judicial hearing. Now, the process after you decide to go down to a judicial hearing route is that you're supposed to have an investigation done by the Human Rights Commission. And in our case, that got waived. It was supposed to happen actually during COVID in 2020, and it never took place. And so we called the Human Rights Commission up. We spoke to them. We were very, I guess, frustrated with the process up to that point because so much time had been lost. And so they spoke to the other parties involved, and the decision was made that there wouldn't be an investigation, that it would be referred to a full judicial inquiry. So we were assigned then an adjudicator for the case. And what a lot of people don't realize is that even leading up to a hearing, there are there are a lot of meetings that take place with this chief adjudicator and with all the parties involved. And a lot of discussions are had about the hearing and the process that it will intake. I can't even tell you how many meetings we had. It seemed like it was every month for almost all of 20, but yeah, for probably a year. And then at some point, the judicial the adjudicator determines that a date will be set, and that's how it started for us. That we had to go through all of these hoops first, and then go through getting the date set, and assigning or setting the witnesses. All of our witnesses also before the hearing had to provide affidavits, including myself and Todd, and our expert witnesses also had to provide statements, and which in the case of our expert witnesses, both had opportunities to rebut each other's statements as well. So it's a fairly lengthy process. Never would have imagined in a million years that it would go down this road before we even got to go to a hearing in person. But I will be the first to tell you that as hard as it was on our family, as hard as it was on our relationship and our marriage, we would do it again. And I'm sure Todd would feel the same way, because in the end, the outcome outweighed what we went through over the last 6 years. And Carter has a right to an education and to be taught just like hearing children. And so we feel that we were vindicated in the end. It just is such a shame, an awful shame, that the process is so long and drawn out.
But it's designed to be that way, to grind you down. And the best punctuate that was, I'll quote some testimony from the hearing, where a person from the Department of Education, in her testimony, acknowledged that in the past she had made a statement where she laughed and said, we don't have to worry about human rights complaints because they never go anywhere. And that was their attitude. And she acknowledged she had said it
And laughed.
Wow,
because they
that's
knew
unbelievable.
it was so difficult to actually go through a human rights case. They knew they would never have to. And to our lawyer's credit, Kyle Rees, he asked her a question, and he said, now that one has gone somewhere, have you changed your mind?
Oh, I'm just so concerned about the impact it's had on both of you. So I know that both of you have learned American Sign Language so that you can communicate with your son. And so why do you think that ASL is so important for your son's education? Because really that was at the crux of why you moved forward with the complaint. So in general, when we think about hearing parents who find out that they have a deaf child, and they get information from medical professionals. And often what happens, a high percentage of the doctors encourage parents to think about a cochlear implant or speech therapy, but ASL is never really one of the options. But you two decided that ASL was important for Carter. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, for Carter, I mean, it's the same for our older son. He's hearing, and his first language is English. So ASL to Carter is just as important to him as English is to our other son. I mean, that is his first language. So you could say, you know, make the comparison to anybody's first language, be it German or Japanese or Russian or whatever. You know, it's very difficult to succeed without a first language. And the thing that makes me super, super angry is that I believe in my heart there's a lack of appreciation for American Sign Language as a true language, as a language that is on par and equal with English or French or other world languages. I'll give you an example. In testimony, the former chair of the Board of Trustees referred to American Sign Language as hand speaking. And when he said that, my wife and I looked at each other and we said, did you just hear what I heard? And I couldn't believe it. He actually said that. He referred to it as hand speaking.
Yeah.
And that was somebody at a very, very high level. This was the chair of the Board of Trustees of the English School District. And that's how he referred to American Sign Language. That's how ignorant the people in positions of power were and still are, really.
And just to add to that, you know, over the years while we were fighting this, people that we spoke to within the school system with education would always refer to American Sign Language as an accommodation. And I was infuriated, and it got to the point that I even said to our lawyer, Kyle, we can't use that language. This is ridiculous because ASL is not an accommodation. It's a language. You wouldn't refer to English as an accommodation. So why would you refer to ASL as an accommodation? It just doesn't make sense. And I think that a lot of the problems stem from language that's being used in these systems that are either unaware, uneducated, indifferent, but it starts with, you know, educating people that this got to be recognized for what it is. And I think that one of the greatest outcomes from our hearing is that the chief adjudicator, Brody Gallant, did recognize that ASL is not an accommodation and that Carter has a right to the language. And so I was so relieved and proud and I just felt such an enormous mix of emotions the day that I read the ruling and when he mentioned that, because that's very powerful and that's what we've been saying for so long.
I think that your comment speaks to a common notion that people don't value deaf people. The deaf education system has devalued ASL and deaf people and not seen them as equal and not seen ASL as an equivalent bona fide language. The World Federation of the Deaf has a theme this year about for Deaf International Week of Sign Languages. and that everywhere around the world, regardless of what country you're in, whether it's in Canada, it's ASL or LSQ, or in Japan with Japanese Sign Language, that sign languages are languages, period. So in every school, everywhere, sign language should be used for deaf children. Now, we talked about American Sign Language and mentioned deaf culture a little bit. So I think that it's so your learning and your knowledge of ASL and immersing yourself in learning ASL and deaf culture gave you some positionality when you were speaking to the school board. Is that correct?
To some degree, yes, for sure. You know, Todd and I'll be completely transparent that when Carter was born, we found out when he was 3 months old that he's deaf. And we don't know any deaf people at time. We didn't know any deaf people. We didn't know anything about deaf culture, history. We were completely, I guess, unaware. And we had a lot of researching to do. And so I will say that, you know, Kim, you mentioned about the doctors seem to push this narrative of cochlear implants and this more hearing, I guess, world. And that was our case, because when Carter was in the hospital and the information was given to us, they told us that we had three options. One, that we could try hearing aids, but because he was so profoundly deaf, they said that it's highly unlikely they would work. Two, we could try cochlear implants, and that if we did so, by the time he was 5 and started kindergarten, he would be on par with that of his hearing friends with regards to reading and speaking. And three, he could try American Sign Language. But if he was to go with the American Sign Language route, we weren't allowed to use cochlear implants or hearing aids. And so we were left that day with only resources for cochlear implants. That was it. There was no resources, no information, no referrals for ASL, deaf community, nothing. And I unfortunately went home and did try to Google online to see, well, what can I find out about the deaf community? Where can I take ASL classes if this was something I want to do? And I couldn't find anything, which made it so much more difficult for me. I found the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, and now, you know, years later, I understand that, well, they're two completely different entities, but that's all I found. And ironically enough, we went there and we met with those people because we didn't know anyone else existed. And so it was, you know, it was a very stressful time, an overwhelming time for us as parents, because here we were in a position to make life-changing decisions for our child. What do? We're hearing people. We only know the hearing world. We had absolutely no resources or support for anything else. And so we did choose cochlear implants. But interestingly enough, I should say we, based on what was told to us in that meeting that first day, we never told anybody at the hospital that we were learning American Sign Language. We did it all in secrecy. We did it for years before we finally felt, okay, we need to tell the hospital that we're doing this, because we also need to start fighting and advocating for Carter to get some access to American Sign Language as a toddler. And so, you know, it was intimidating, because as parents, you feel like you don't have a whole lot of support and you're doing a lot of this on your own. And it's extremely hard. But we knew that cochlear implants, regardless, are a tool. And so just like any other tool and technology that exists, it will break, it will stop working. It's not reliable all the time. And so we knew from the very beginning that even if they ended up working for Carter and he did start school being on par with his hearing peers, as what was told to us, He would still have opportunities in his life where, there would be places in his life where the cochlear implants may not work. And I did not want my child to ever be in a situation where he ever felt unsafe, not confident, or unable to be able to have a conversation or communicate with anybody, and vice versa. So we knew from the very beginning that he needed ASL, that this was actually his first language, not English. And he had a right to learn ASL. And he's deaf. At the end of the day, cochlear implants does not make you hearing. And that's something we have stood by and said since day one. Carter has access to sound. Anyone who ever says that he is hearing, I correct them and say, no, he's not, he's deaf. He has access to sound, which does not make you a hearing person. If you talk to a hearing person and a person wearing cochlear implants, you know, even based on research, the experiences are completely, entirely different. So for him to have some access to sound is one thing. And we quickly realized that ASL was vital to his ability to thrive in this world. And for the first time in our lives, we were able to actually understand our child, what he wanted, what he needed. He was only probably about 13 or 14 months old when he said his first sign to us. And it just, from there, just little words here and there. Problem that we had, which is why we ended up going down the road that we did with education, is that even though we were able to show Carter some signs, they were just words. It was just vocabulary. There was no understanding of a connection to put words into a sentence for meaning. And there was no understanding of how a conversation flowed. There was no ability to ever watch two-way conversations. There was no role modeling from deaf people. I mean, the list goes on of things that he was losing out on. And in order to improve his sign language, in order to have the experience that he had an entitlement to and a right to.
And when Carter started school, he was 5 years old, like all children are in Canada who start kindergarten. And when he started, he was the only deaf child in the entire school of 750 people. That was his experience with starting school as a 5-year-old. He was completely socially isolated. And in the testimony of a deaf student assistant who was also socially isolated at that school, they were both ignored. They were just both, the student assistant and Carter were just there. And the deaf student assistant in testimony at the hearing testified that on 2 occasions in September and October of 2018, when she tried to raise concerns about deaf education with during a professional development session, a director of education who was overseeing the session came up to her and said, concentrate on something different that's more challenging. That's not important.
Not a priority.
It's not a priority. I mean, that was the attitude. And I might add, that person still has a job as a director of education. One of the things that's so upsetting for us following the decision is that not one single person has been disciplined or has been terminated from their positions for what they did to Carter. The government has normalized the discrimination of deaf children and deaf people in general. It's okay. You can get away with it. Even when it's proven in a board of inquiry, even when it's proven, it still doesn't matter. You still get away with it.
That's just wrong. Oh,
And that's the thing that just
so unfair.
it's the thing that really just, it eats at my soul. The fact that nobody has faced any consequences. Carter's life is ruined and their lives have just continued like nothing ever happened.
It is so unfair. So there was no ASL exposure from kindergarten to grade 3. And then after the human rights complaint, you started to see some improvement, or was everything just status quo? Can you give us a little bit of timeline on how his education may have changed?
So in the kindergarten was really bad. In kindergarten, he received 32 hours total. The entirety of kindergarten with an itinerant teacher with some knowledge of American Sign Language. And I say some.
Oh, sorry, could I hang on? Sorry. So in 1 year, he received 32 hours. That's it?
That's
Oh,
it.
okay. Sorry. I just had to make sure that was a
Yeah.
staggering number.
Yeah. 32 hours with an itinerant teacher with some knowledge of American Sign Language. I say some knowledge because the person was never proficiency tested. So we don't know what her proficiency was. We suspect it was low, but we don't know for sure because she was never tested. The rest of the time in kindergarten, he was with a hearing teacher, no American Sign Language, and a student assistant who couldn't finger spell her own name correctly. That was kindergarten. And then when we filed the human rights complaint, at the start of grade 1, he was increased to 2 hours per day with an itinerant teacher. And then halfway through grade 1, it was increased to full time with a itinerant teacher. But even then, he was still completely socially isolated. He had no other deaf children with him. Like there was no, like the only person he could talk to was an adult that was much older than he was. He was a 6-year-old boy and he could only speak to one adult. So it's the social isolation piece that's the real hard part, because there was no incidental learning. He was just there in a classroom surrounded by hearing children, in a school surrounded by hearing children, the only deaf child in a population of 750 children.
And, you know, one of the things that the student assistant that Carter had at the time, who is deaf, stated at the hearing as well, is that
This is a great one now, just to be clear.
sorry, not student assistant, his teacher, of a deaf and hard of hearing. One of the things she stated on the stand was that, you know, for anything, if any of the other kids wanted to ask Carter a question, they would actually have to go through his teacher to ask Carter the question, and then vice versa. And that's just not natural. That's not natural for a 6-year-old child to have to use an adult as a vessel for communication to another child. And this was Carter's life for the 4 years at Beachy Cove Elementary. And so, as you can imagine, that was, you know, that was a very horrible experience to have. His mental health, to have to go through that, never being able to interact with children as he would typically see all of the kids every single day, day in and out, laughing together, playing together, working on questions in school together, in groups assigned to work together. I mean, Carter's a smart kid. He saw this happening right in front of his own eyes. And, you know, the question of why, I'll never forget one night. I was putting him to bed. And he asked me how to speak, if I could teach him how to speak. Because all of the kids at school spoke. And he couldn't talk to them. It's not fair that he was forced in that environment for 4 years. And the most amazing thing was that when he was finally taken out of that environment and put in a classroom for only deaf children that communicate in ASL, his whole life experience with school changed. He didn't know that having other deaf peers was even a possibility. He didn't know that he could be in a classroom where people just use ASL. He didn't know that existed. And so he was forced in an environment for 4 years because there was no other options given to him. And as soon as this other option came up and we put him in that classroom, he's never wanted to look back at his old school. Never.
And it's Kim just made me think of something. When we talk about the class that was started in grade 4 at East Point Elementary, the exact same classroom was proposed in 2017, 2018, and 2019 by the itinerant teachers, and it was rejected 3 years in a row because nobody cared.
And Kim,
I think
sorry.
now, just given the time that we have, it's 12:40 where I am. That was a pretty emotional storytelling that or sharing that you did. So I would like to suggest that we have a 10-minute break, and then we can all come back after that break and regroup. Okay, everybody can turn their cameras off. We'll take a break for 10 minutes and regroup. Okay, thank you. Hello and welcome back, everyone. So during the break, I was thinking about where some of the advocacy work really should be lying. Yes, definitely in your case with the school board, but I think it really starts with medical professionals. We need to, they need to get more information about deaf people and sign language. For most provinces, there is a clause that if a child receives an implant, they are not to be learning American Sign Language because it impacts their learning of sound and speech, or contradicts or impedes their learning of that. And that seems to be quite common across the country. So I'm thinking that really what we need is to change that, and that that could then have an impact on schools and the decisions that they make. The other option that we have is the Accessible Canada Act. I think that could be used in our favor. It's not operating at 100% right now because although it's been passed, there are, it still needs more in order to get into legislation. I think so by 2040, if things aren't happening now, children can't wait that long. We need to do more advocacy work. And also, in the local schools, I think that as parents have the power. The deaf community doesn't have the power. I think that having parents partner with deaf community members, then maybe we may see some success in changing inclusive education for everyone. So I don't mean to go on, but this is just some thoughts that I had during the break. I want to bring up the other two panelists, Kristen Snodden and make sure I have that spelled right, and also Travis Morgan. Travis is a former student of inclusive education in Newfoundland. So Kristen and Travis, if you could turn your cameras on, please. Kristen's saying hello.
So I'm not a former student of Newfoundland. I was mainstreamed as a mainstream student in Ontario, but I was there for a brief period of time. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Travis, for that. So Kristen has already done a brief introduction. So Travis, if you wouldn't mind just explaining your background and your experience of a mainstream education.
Oh,
no, Travis,
sorry.
I'm asking you to go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking Kristen. My mistake. So as mentioned, I am a former mainstream student in Ontario, in Northern Ontario. But I went to the Belleville School of the Deaf for an opportunity to be part of a deaf school there. There was about 87, 88.
I'm not sure on that.
When I went to the school for the deaf, it was in 87, 88, 1988. And ASL was allowed at that time.
Was not allowed.
Sorry, was not allowed at that time. So I was learning C, signed exact English. At that time, my parents were able to advocate for me to be able to go to the deaf school. There were lots of discussions with the principals. There were interpreters available. And I think at that time I was 13. So that was in
96.
In 1996. Learning language at the time was very difficult for me. I was able to do a bit of reading. My parents were able to help me with homework. But if other children, I didn't want other children to have the same experience that I had growing up, where I was forced to work in a school with interpreters. Going to college and university, there were interpreters. I had note-taking services. There were some resources. And, when I saw Carter's story, I asked, is there anything that I can do to help? Is there any way that I can participate in order to not let Carter have the same experience that I did? Kim and Todd, I'm so sorry to hear your story. It's so hard to listen to. I've heard it many times, but it's very, very difficult. So I've been working with the Ontario Government of Healthcare, advocating for language, sign language. So looking for some more funding where it could be provided for ASL teachers. So that's my current role. Thank you.
So Travis, I have a personal question for you. You don't have to respond to it if you don't want to. Do you have a cochlear implant?
No, a hearing aid.
But so you use American Sign Language, but you weren't using sign language as a young child, and now you are. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your journey?
It was a decision that my mom had made that the hearing aids would be okay. There was a book. It was a really, really thick book, blue book that had American Sign Language. I think one of the original ASL books. And my parents didn't have enough money to buy that book. And I think that I went to a ear, nose, and throat specialist, and they had, asked about why I was using a hearing aid. And my parents said, well, the hearing aids haven't worked, so that's why he's not using them any longer. He is able to hear a little bit in one ear, but they said if he would like to remove the hearing aid and only use sign language, that would be okay. So those were the options that were allotted to me.
Thank you, Travis. Okay, so now, Kristen.
And Travis, here I'm going to shut my camera off just so that there's better bandwidth for Kristen. Oh, sorry, let me just have a quick look at my notes. Kim is saying. So Kristen became involved in this case after you were asked to become an expert witness.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Do you still feel now with your experience before, after, and during, do you still feel that Carter does have opportunity to continue to learn and be successful in the education system?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer. I think there are two things of equal importance that need to be weighed in considering this answer. Carter can learn and develop in whatever way he wants to. I feel fortunate that I have met Carter just last year in Newfoundland, and he is a very special person. He's not like totally out there and wild, but he just has sort of a beautiful aura where people are attracted to him. And I think it's because of his mind, because of how he thinks and his understanding of the world, and people are just naturally attracted to him. And I think because of that, there's always hope and there's always opportunities for him in the future. And as long as he has the engagement of the community and the collaboration and the support of everybody behind him, I see that hope for Carter. On the other hand, as I mentioned, I think we have to recognize that there is trauma from his experience, from what has happened to him in the past, and it's difficult for people to envision. I think even as deaf people, we deny that trauma and that experience, even though we know what has happened to us or to other children. And I think for many parents, they don't want to accept that this is the case. And so looking at both of those very weighty facts, I think that the most important thing is to just keep going and continue. Carter is going to have more in his future. I am going to continue to do research and write on this case and about Carter himself. I'm not finished with that. I think that with Kim and Todd sending that letter to the government, that can then be brought up to the UN. And in terms of the CRPD, the rights for people with disabilities, I think we can bring it to that level as well. So it doesn't stop here. The advocacy doesn't stop in Newfoundland. It can go globally. And I think that that can make an impact as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Kristen. Travis, would you mind turning your camera back on again? There we go. Thank you. After the hearing has been completed and the decision was made that Todd and Kim had won, what impacts have you seen since this has happened? I don't know if Kristen, maybe would you like to respond to that first, and then Travis? Maybe I'll go ahead and start. So in terms of the Ontario government, we have already. So when the hearing had completed and it was announced that the family had won their case, I know that the Ontario government was sort of took a step back and be like, "Ooh, do we have any of these problems here in this province? Is this something that could happen in Ontario?" The decision was to have a look at the policy, and yes, there were some challenges found as to whether or not sign or AVT were the only two options, and if they had to be used separately. Now we see that we have both sign options and AVT available. There's been a quiet announcement last week that both are available. So we're expecting to see that if there are any problems that do arise, hoping that it will have a positive impact. But again, the provincial government is still a little nervous about what could potentially happen, but seeing how you had advocated so strongly and were able to succeed, I'm hoping that will make small changes going forward to the policy. Ontario, or Kristen, I'm not too sure if there's anything else you'd like to add in terms of mental health, and if there are any issues with having a cochlear implant and learning sign language at the same time.
I'm sorry, I missed your question, Travis. I was also reading the captioning and I missed your question.
Sure. In terms of individuals who have cochlear implants and signing, are we still seeing any challenges?
Are you talking about Ontario, the Ontario Infant Program?
Yeah. Yes.
I've done a fair bit of research on that program. I worked with Jennifer Jackson, who's a deaf lawyer, and we've published 2 papers actually in this regard or in relation to this. The Ontario Infant Program was established in the year 2000 to provide service to families if they have a baby with hearing loss. There is a hearing screening. So now all babies who are born are immediately given the hearing screening at the hospital. And if they're identified as having a hearing loss, then they're referred for more in-depth testing. And if the child is deemed deaf or hard of hearing, they will provide service. Now, I know that Kim and Todd were talking about some options that they were given at the time. So it was either hearing aids or an implant. And I think that that's been quite similar with the Hearing Infant Program in Ontario. But back in the year 2000, what they did was they offered auditory verbal training, commonly known as AVT. And I think that that is really where the problem stems from, because proponents of auditory verbal training really do not agree with augmenting any learning with sign language. The goal is to learn to hear and speak as a normal hearing person would. And so what happens is, so that's the goal. And so then a cochlear implant or hearing aid or using sign language are other options. And then there's also the dual approach, which is both speech therapy and sign language. But that didn't come into place until 2018 when the new guidelines were established. And so what they did then was, now there was only AVT or sign language. That dual approach was removed. So the infant hearing program actually supports a dual approach, or is not supporting a dual approach, regardless of the research and the science, which there's a plethora of. They're focused only on one or the other. And it's not just Canada, but this is happening in other countries as well. It's a global problem. Now, I think maybe I haven't answered your question, Travis. Travis, do you mind restating your question again? I think there was something specific that you had asked me.
Yeah, in terms of tools from, you said in 2008, there was a 6-month time period that parents had when a child was identified as deaf, they had 6 months to choose which type of treatment they were going to go into. Are we seeing that there? Just for some interpreter clarification. So in 2018, there were the two options that were presented to parents. And at that time, they had up to 6 months to make a decision. So when the funding ran out for that program, when the ACA was passed, there were a lot of Indigenous people who were lobbying the federal government for language acquisition. Indigenous people that were lobbying the federal government for language acquisition. So if there was funding that can be provided to the Indigenous communities, there were many, at the same time, there were many parents that were asking of, should there be funding provided to deaf students? As we see in Carter's situation, he did not have enough resources. Both of his parents advocated heavily for it. So there was discussion on, okay, if there's a 6-month time period, if there are any other deaf children in the IHP currently, and they are given the opportunity to both sign and speak, that is okay. But up until recently, Carter's family is seeing, if we're seeing what's happening in Newfoundland, parents are having to threaten to sue the government in order to be able to be given these tools for their children to learn language and succeed. So I think this goes back to the medical model. The Eldridge case. And the Eldridge case that happened here in BC, where they had to go through a lengthy legal process in order to get services in hospitals. This went to the Supreme Court. They were able to successfully win that case. And at that point, having interpreters in healthcare was established all across Canada. So potentially this situation that, with Carter's parents winning the lawsuit, maybe this will bleed through to other provinces in Canada so that other deaf children will not experience the same type of treatment, and they will not have to go through the legal system like Todd and Kim did. Hopefully this will be precedent setting and it will spread across Canada. So my team is trying to find the letter that Tom and Kim had sent to the CRPD. No, not this one.
While Kim is looking for that, I could talk a little bit about the letter, I guess, what the point of it was. And
Sure. Please go ahead, Todd.
I wrote the Federal Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities last week, and CC'd a number of individuals, including our two provincial cabinet representatives at the federal level, on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, specifically Article 24, which has specific provisions for what should be provided and what is appropriate for a deaf child in an education system. This convention, as most people on this call know, was ratified by Canada in 2010, but unfortunately it hasn't been enforced. And it's really upsetting that legislation like this, which is really life-changing for the people that it impacts, gets ratified, but there's no action to follow up to make sure it gets implemented. From our perspective, there's a legal obligation on all provinces to abide by the provisions in the UN Convention. And had that been done, we would not have to have filed a human rights complaint. And sadly, despite the fact we had a decision and a finding of discrimination against Carter, for deaf children in other parts of our province, it's still exactly the same. Nothing has changed for those students. We've had 4 different parents reach out to us in other parts of this province with stories of exactly the same language deprivation, social isolation, lack of access to teachers as Carter had. There's been no systemic change here, even in my own province. Recently, we were in Ottawa and we received an award from the Canadian Association of the Deaf, the Henry Vlog Award. And one of the things we said was, we challenged CAD and all the provincial affiliate representatives present at that gathering, go back to their provinces and demand accountability. Because right now, while Carter's case sets a precedent that this was discriminatory, it also sets a precedent that no one was held accountable. And it shows to people in positions of influence or authority or in decision-making positions that you can make these decisions and discriminate and do it with impunity. And I would really call on the Canadian Association of the Deaf, all provincial affiliates, to lobby strongly to the Newfoundland and Labrador government of Andrew Furey to demand, not ask, not suggest, not recommend, demand there be accountability of these individuals. Because as long as these individuals remain in their positions, precedent is set, you can discriminate against deaf people and get away with it. And that is not acceptable.
Travis.
Travis, if you don't mind holding on for one quick second, just want to point out that there has been a link posted in the chat. We read your letter and we are in full support. One thing that came to mind, I'm not too sure if everyone knows, so Travis is based in Ontario, so maybe he doesn't know, but there several years ago in Ontario, within the education system, the Catholic education system, They did receive funding from the Ontario government for the Catholic School Board. Other school boards did not receive this particular funding. It was only to Catholic schools. So these other schools sued, lost, and then in Hague, sued again, won that case, and brought that to the federal government. And again, it showed that it was a provincial decision under their jurisdiction. Each provincial government was able to make whatever decisions they needed to. The Minister of Education is only for each province, as the education system is under provincial jurisdiction. So you're right. Across Canada, we need to lobby each of our Ministry of Educations provincially in order to make sure that these services are provided. As Canada has ratified the UNCRPD, that means that each province must follow suit with what is laid out in that article. So we do need to continue to advocate and make those changes and to change the views of the individuals who have responsibility and power. Within the deaf and hard of hearing community all across Canada, we do have a lot of, we do have a lot of friends who are hard of hearing, have grown up in mainstream settings. There are a variety of people who have trauma from language deprivation, from social isolation, and they are feeling that, my life is ruined by the decisions made from these people in power because I wasn't given an adequate education. I wasn't given ASL services. I wasn't put in healthy environments. And these parents of these children accepted what was given to them at that time, and they struggle with that. And it was based on the advice from the medical teams, the hospitals and nurses and audiologists and whatnot, of really strongly recommending to not provide ASL, to not let these individuals be part of the deaf community. Another thing to keep in mind is that in Maryland, in the States, there used to be a deaf school in Maryland. I attended there for a few years in elementary school. There was a new law established in Maryland, which was really incredible to see, that I'm really hoping that our provincial schools will follow suit, that when a baby is born and it is found that they do have hearing loss, of course, there are, the medical tools that are offered, but having a deaf consultant part of that medical team should be recognized. That if, and there's opportunity for the student to then, talk about pros and cons of going to a mainstream school or to a deaf school, but it's really important that when a deaf student goes into a deaf school, it's incredibly exciting to see the access and the communication and the socialization. And at that point, hoping that deaf schools will continue to flourish and grow. One thing that we can each do in our own provinces is really, I think that, again, with the medical team, when a baby is found to have a hearing loss, that a deaf consultant does need to be included in those consultations with the parents to be able to provide that other access and the other options for the toolbox. So that it's important to know that all parents will have support in ASL or in ASL if that is the journey that they just do decide to pursue. So hopefully that there will be some positive outcomes from this human rights case. And there needs to be more support to parents in hospitals from the medical team. So that is something that I think that we should continue to look at, and how it can be a positive collaboration with the hospitals and the deaf communities, and letting the parents know that if your child is deaf, there's a community that will welcome them and help them thrive and grow. And of course, as the parents are welcome to be a part of that community as well. Just looking at time, Kristen, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I just agree 100% with what you've said in terms of the collaboration with the deaf community and the parents in order to continue this advocacy work. So thank you for that statement, Kim.
Thank you. Travis? Yes, I just wanted to say that in terms of, it's important that we have more education, but the problem is that within the Ontario education, again, is provincially There are 4 provincial agreements, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and BC. I think BC might have just recently passed their accessibility laws, but there is nothing in so Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and BC, which has just recently passed their accessibility laws, are the only ones in Canada. The other provinces don't have anything. Todd and Kim, is there anything else that you would like to add?
One of the things I'd like to point out to everybody, for those who are not aware, the complete decision in Carter's case, as well as the full transcript from the hearing last year, can be found at www.carterchurchill.ca. And as well, I would ask and encourage people to follow our Facebook page, Deaf Children Matter, because we regularly make postings there, and we make various updates, and we made a lot of postings about Carter's case.
One of the things too that I kind of like to give an update, I suppose now. I mean, a lot of people know about the hearing and what happened. Carter just started a brand new school. He's in grade 7 now, so he's in junior high, which is very exciting for him, but scary for me as a mom. But you know, one of the things that came out of the hearing was that there was this group of children that were all same age as Carter, that were all deaf and all being language deprived. And the school district knew about these children as early as 2013 and just stuck their heads in the sand and did nothing for them. He, when he started grade 4, he was placed in a classroom with these kids, with the exact kids that he should have been put in the classroom with from day 1. And they have continued in the same classroom for the last few years, and they all just started junior high together in St. Paul's. We, you know, when the hearing ended last fall, we didn't stop our advocacy. We continue to fight. We continue to write letters. There's a new now CEO with the English School District. So we have had conversations with him. We've sent him numerous letters requesting you know, more to be done with deaf education and to hire deaf teachers. We have been fighting for there to be more involvement from the deaf leaders for our children. And we're happy to say that they did hire a deaf teacher to work in Carter's classroom. Finally, this is the first year. And we actually do have a director of deaf and hard of hearing who is a deaf person, actually a Newfoundlander, but was living in BC for quite some time and has now moved back to Newfoundland. And hopefully we'll be able to make some great changes that are needed for our entire province. You know, there's obviously been a lot of changes done for Carter and his cohort of classmates because of the hearing. However, there's still problems. There's still problems with his classrooms. There's still problems with access. There's obviously a lot of problems still outside of our city of St. John's for the rest of the province as well. So we have a lot of hope that this new director can bring his own lived experiences, his own professional experience and educational experience to the English School District. And we can all learn from him, and hopefully he'll be able to make the changes that are needed. So some good things are happening, finally.
If I could just add a little bit to what you're saying about the new director. Yes, the school board just hired a deaf person who was formerly a teacher at the BC School for the Deaf. And his hometown is in Newfoundland. He was born and raised there. He studied at Gallaudet University and completed his master's degree and was working here in BC, and now has moved back to Newfoundland. He is the Director of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Student Services in Newfoundland for the school board, and his name is Jonathan McDonald. He's a really nice guy, and I'm hoping that he is going to be able to impact some positive change and improvement for Newfoundland. When I had graduated from high school, I thought about going to Gallaudet, and I thought that by doing so, I wouldn't have to worry about access. I would have full access to communication. There would be no need for accommodation because they have everything there. Everything is in sign language. But what happens is if deaf people want to attend a public university, whether it's the University of Toronto or where have you, they have to apply, be accepted, and then they have to go through all of the steps in order to get accommodation. So when I think, okay, so then drawing the parallel back to children from grades K to 12, when we think about schools for the deaf, everything is readily available. All of the services are there. There's access in sign language. It's a one-stop shop where deaf children have access to everything that they need. And whereas in an inclusive education, an educational assistant who signs needs to be hired, need to hire an interpreter, and all of these other support people. So when you think about it, the choice should be easy, whether a child should go to a school for the deaf or they should go to a public school in an inclusive education. And the argument is always that deaf schools are really expensive to run, but when you look at all the costs that are spent on all of these individual support services that a deaf child needs to have, and then when you think about this case and all the money that was spent on lawyers, what was it, like 300,000? And Kristen saying no, it was way more than that. How much was it altogether? What was it, 700,000, 800,000?
750,000.
$750,000 spent on the lawyers to prevent this case from going ahead and to argue that you were wrong. And that could have been money well spent on improving accommodation for Carter, or that $750,000 would go a long way. So now that money has been completely wasted on legal fees for the hearing, and it seems like such a shame that that amount of money could have been used to establish some programs or services that would accommodate deaf children in the way that they need to be accommodated. And so Kim and Todd, like you said, you're still advocating, and of course, like, this is just it's so enraging that people in the position of power, I'm not sure if I got Tony, I missed the last name of the person, but with the person that you mentioned, they haven't been fired. They haven't, like, there's been nothing, no repercussions. So there's been no accountability for any of those people that are in a position of power. And, if that's the case, then hearing teachers who have a deaf child arrive in their classroom, they don't feel any sort of obligation to accommodate them. And they're not going to meet the demands of what needs to happen. So you hope that people have actually learned a lesson, but it seems that maybe they haven't. So, again, just back to this accountability on the part of the government or the school board. For me, that's the heartbreaking piece. It's not fair to the child or any of the children, and it's not fair to the parents. Okay, I think then now, in terms of wrapping up, what I'd like to do, Travis, did you want to add something?
Yes, you had mentioned that it's not fair to the parents, it's not fair to the students, but it's also not fair to his siblings as well. So Todd and Kim, how is Carter doing now? How does he communicate with his brother?
Really good. So Hunter has been learning.
Hunter's been signing?
Yeah, he's been learning American Sign Language. They have bonded very well over playing games, video games, and it seemed to very much increase Hunter's need and interest in learning sign language, so that he could challenge his brother in playing video games. But I think too that Hunter is understanding the necessity to be able to have those important conversations with his brother and communicate with him, and not rely on me or his dad to help interpret for him. And so that has every day we see him improving and learning more, and he's doing really well with it. I got to say, we're quite proud of him. He's been through an awful lot, as you can imagine, over the last years, and through this fight. Both of our kids have been through a lot, and Hunter was not isolated from a lot of the mental health issues that the stress of all this has caused. So we're quite proud of where he's to now.
Oh, that's good to know. I see that there are some people with their hands raised for the question and answer period with the audience. And then following that, we'll wrap up. So I think we'll start with Melinda Brown. Melinda, if you could turn your camera on. Melinda Brown.
Hi, everyone. I had an experience growing up in, I attended 3 different schools without interpreting services. So I had to learn C throughout my experience in education. I was able to learn ASL from the deaf community. Kim was actually someone that was very, very helpful and instrumental in me learning sign language. Anything else to add? Yeah, no, I just wanted to let everyone know of my experience of attending 3 different schools. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Melinda. Braden?
Hi, everyone.
Oh, hold on a second, Braden. Okay, you can go ahead. Your spotlight now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Braden Walterhouse. This is my sign name. I'm sorry, the video quality is freezing for the interpreter.
Sorry.
Sorry, Braden, sorry. We just want to let you know, your video is very blurry. If you could maybe shut your background off. Remove the filter. If you could. I'm not sure how to do that. So where the video, you see where the video options are. If you click on the up arrow, you should be able to click shut the blur off or blur my background. And if you click that, it's very difficult to see your signing. Just wanted to let you know. It's very, very hard to see. So we'll have to ask you
as I'm demonstrating here.
Okay, there we go. Would you mind asking your question again? Yes, hi there. My name is Braden Walterhouse. I live in BC. I am a deaf individual that has other disabilities. I have cerebral palsy as well. So I have experienced issues with the education system as well. And I have grown up deaf.
Went to school for the deaf.
Went to the school for the deaf.
Was exposed to ASL.
And I was exposed to ASL. And I carry that with me throughout my life. And I'm still here.
And when I listened to the story about Carter and everything that his parents have gone through.
And when I listened to Carter's parents and his stories, this really does need to be elevated so that all deaf children do have the right to information. And it's incredible to see how parents, how Todd and Kim, how you advocated and fought. And Kim is saying your camera's freezing a little bit, but it's important to see that deaf and hard of hearing students, their education needs to be taken seriously. There needs to be more access so that there is less fighting. And so that deaf people can succeed in life. So that deaf people can succeed in life. So I'm very, very happy with the outcome of your case.
And I'm really happy about Jonathan being in the position of director.
And I'm really happy about Jonathan being in position of director for your school district. I feel like that will lead to some significant change. And I'm very, very happy that Newfoundland, that is being missed here. So I'm very, very happy for the two of you, and congratulations on the fight that you have done. You have been incredible leaders.
And we can all take
and we can all take from your experience, and hopefully that will benefit other deaf children going forward. It's
again, having Jonathan in a position of authority is going to be helpful.
And again, having Jonathan in a position of authority is going to be helpful. And hopefully Carter will have the opportunity to continue to succeed and have deaf teachers throughout his academic career.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Braden. There's some other people who are waiting to ask some questions.
I do have one question. So Jonathan has taken the step to move to Newfoundland in his new position.
It'll be interesting to see.
And it will be interesting to see what changes are being made in his position once he is there, and how that impacts deaf students.
And Carter specifically.
Just to let you know, Jonathan has just started in his position. So there hasn't been a lot at the moment right now in terms of what he's been able to accomplish, because he just started this role recently. So if you wouldn't mind going on to your second question.
I didn't get that.
So Carter's in grade 7 now? Yeah. So so Carter is now in grade 7. Is his teacher deaf or hearing? What's his classroom environment look like for the time being?
So yes, Carter has 2 teachers full-time in his classroom, along with there's a classroom of 5 deaf children, including Carter. And 1 teacher is hearing. The second teacher is deaf and obviously fluent in ASL, her first language. The children also have 2 teaching learning assistants that are both deaf. And Carter also has a student assistant for him personally, which is a deaf lady. So the classroom is very much ASL language rich environment, which is what we've been praying for and hoping for and fighting for years.
I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, there shouldn't be a hearing teacher in there. So, but Braden, just to clarify, there's a hearing teacher and an educational assistant and somebody who is in the classroom who's signing.
Does the hearing person sign? Does the hearing teacher sign?
No, they're depending on the educational assistant. Is that correct, Kim and Todd?
That one's a tricky one to answer.
So just to clarify, there's two teachers. One teacher is a deaf person. She graduated this April with a Bachelor of Education, and we're very, very happy that she's one of Carter's teachers now because she's perfect. The other teacher is a teacher that Carter has had before, who's hearing and who in the past, I guess, was tested to have proficiency that was low, and that still remains concerning to us.
Where did that teacher graduate from? Sorry, Braden, we have to go. We have other people in line right now that are waiting to ask questions. So if you wouldn't mind, we need to move on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
I see we have two more questions and then we will go back.
I think two questions in the chat.
Oh, then we'll go back to, then there are two on Facebook. So we have a question from Melissa Markin. And she is wondering, so the assistant teachers, are they allowed in, they all sign during the school year? So wondering if, within the school environment, if they weren't able to find this ASL teacher, would they have depended more on the EAs in the classroom? How would they have communicated with Carter? If would they have had interpreters in the classroom for him?
Well, that's the problem. Is there is a severe limitation or severe limit on the number of people with the required communication abilities in American Sign Language. So one of the frustrations we have even today is that there's no specified minimum ASL proficiency for any teacher in our province working with a deaf child. It's a preferred requirement only. It's not a mandatory requirement, which is very frustrating even today after the decision. And there's still no mandatory ASL proficiency testing before a teacher is hired. So that's very frustrating even now.
And I think too, Kim, you asked about the interpreters, if Carter would have access to interpreters. A couple of years ago, they had interpreters in the classroom because we feel that the hearing teacher wasn't able to use American Sign Language proficiently enough for the children to understand. So they had interpreters brought in. We were very frustrated and upset with this because we don't want, for one thing, interpreters are not teachers. Two, they weren't educational interpreters. And three, we want our child to be taught by a deaf teacher. End of story. So it was frustrating for us to see this being used. And so now they can't find an interpreter if Carter and his classmates wants to go or needs to go to, say, technology class where there's only a hearing teacher. And so I asked a question the other day, what happens when this classroom with Carter goes to technology class, there's only a hearing teacher because he's being taken out of his ASL class to go into a hearing classroom with hearing children. What happens in that environment? How does he learn what the teacher is talking about? And they told us, much to our surprise, that they are given the notes that the teacher is going to teach that day in class for technology in advance so that they can teach the kids themselves. And then they send the children to the hearing classroom and have them sit in on that classroom. It blows my mind that my child is sitting in a classroom where it's a hearing centric environment with a hearing teacher speaking English, and these kids don't have access to that for the entire class. I don't know why anyone would think that's okay. So like I said, there's still some problems in that classroom, and this is only the second week of school. It's grade 7, junior high is a whole new type of school environment. It's done differently than elementary school. So we need to figure out how we're going to move forward with this.
Yeah, it's a totally new experience. There seems to be two different tracks here. So direct education, where a student is receiving their education from a teacher who is fluent in sign language, and then indirect education, where it's coming through an interpreter. So there's a lot of hard of hearing and deaf children who don't like that form of mediated education, but they don't feel part of their education, much the same as what you're saying about Carter. I myself have 4 children. My oldest is deaf. And then the second oldest is a CODA, child of deaf parents, and the 2 youngest are hard of hearing. And they do not go to the School for the Deaf. They are in inclusive education, the 2 youngest. And they don't want to have interpreters. And even though I've advocated and to make sure that they have everything that they need, they're like, Mama, I do not want to have an interpreter in the classroom. I don't really understand why, but what they want is they don't want their friends going to the interpreter. Oh, could you tell my child this or tell them that? They want to be communicating directly with their peers. And so what I ended up doing was finding an alternative program in a very small school, and there are 7 students in the classroom. And so my son and daughter are part of that very small classroom. And because of them being hard of hearing and being a smaller classroom, they're able to actually use their hearing. And they graduated 2 years ago. The second youngest graduated 2 years ago, and the youngest is graduating this year. But I think for hard of hearing students, they have a different experience that needs to be considered as well. And in order to really participate with their peers on an equal level, having an interpreter doesn't allow them to do that. And then they end up being being socially isolated, because whether or not a student wants to talk to the deaf student, they have to go through the interpreter. Oh, can you tell them this, and can you tell them that? And then there's no real connection between friends. I absolutely understand what that experience is. I'm looking at another question here that was from, sorry, the interpreter missed that. Alexandra. So in terms of the medical and the educational system, what about making a change in the community? I think that yes, what we want is the medical profession and the education system to be working with the deaf community, and the deaf community working with parents who have deaf children. I'll give you an example. I think it was back in, I don't know, 94, 93. There were a group of parents who all had deaf children. And one of those parents, and pardon me, this was back in 1954 or 53. One of those parents was my grandparent, and lobbied the government in Alberta to establish a school, and the School for the Deaf was opened in 1955, and it was deaf parents and hearing parents who worked together. And so what we need to do today is work together to lobby our provincial governments to establish ASL as the primary mode of education, whether or not somebody has a cochlear implant or doesn't. You know, whatever, if it's a hearing aid or an implant, that is a tool. They're both considered tools, but sign language is a language. So if somebody wants to use their hearing, that's totally fine, but we need to provide our children with access to a language for their education. And as Kristen was, or as Kim and Todd were mentioning about the screening and their experience of the ASLPI or proficiency screening, we don't have that. And I can't remember if it was somebody from the school board, whether it was Tony Stark or somebody else, I can't remember in the transcript. What they said was, you know, whether it's Toronto Metropolitan University or where have you, having a program where they would provide a degree, but they don't have a ASL proficiency. So they'll provide people with a degree to be deaf educators, but there's nothing in there for ASL proficiency. So we need to establish a baseline of what the minimum for proficiency would be for people to be working in education systems, whether, you know, throughout the country, regardless of what province you're in. So establishing a baseline for teachers of the deaf. Renata has a question.
Yes, hi everyone.
I have mild CP.
I have mild CP, and I can really empathize with Carter, having gone through a similar experience. And I think that it's very important that that you, as parents, you are continuing to support and advocate for Carter. It's incredible to see you do this work for him. And I just wanted to say thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you, Renata. Kyle is next. Okay, your spotlight, Kyle, you can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle, and I'm from Alberta. And I'm the president of the Alberta Association of the Deaf. And Kim and Todd, when you were in Ottawa in this past August, I asked a question. I don't know if that applies to both, or maybe to Kim, who is the host. But after you had sued the school board and had won your case, I'm just wondering what happens next? What's the next step for whether it be in Newfoundland and Labrador or at a provincial level for curriculum development for boards or trustees in order for them to be able to recognize that deaf students do need to have access to sign languages? I don't know if you have any comments, and based on what Kim had said, I know that Kim had mentioned that there was $750,000 that was spent for this legal case. That money could have been spent elsewhere.
Even if it was just a fraction.
Even if it was just a fraction of that, could have impacted positively to the deaf students. So I'm just wondering what type of improvements you're hoping to see with the deaf learners and the ability to, or the provision of sign language in the classes to develop a curriculum.
Kim or Todd, do you want to answer that?
Yes, and certainly, there's so much work that needs to be done. Our next steps, is many next steps. But I will speak to one and let Todd take over. One of the things that I've always been very passionate about since Carter was a baby was learning American Sign Language. And, obviously this is his first language. And it's great that he's finally in a classroom where he has access to deaf peers, deaf role models, and deaf teachers. But what happens in the classroom? He's still, in a sense, isolated from the community. And, as a mom, it's just frustrating for me to see that he's always got to look to me and ask me to interpret for him. I feel that one of the things I would like to see happen here is for ASL to be introduced as an actual language in the curriculum for Newfoundland and Labrador. Obviously, I don't know what other provinces do with regards to it being a full-fledged course, but it's something that I've already talked to one of the leaders of the MHA for the NDP party, and I've spoken to him about this. I want to see it happen. I want to see it become part of legislation, and I want it to be named after Carter. I think that access to American Sign Language is something that everybody should have. And we all talk about as a society the importance of inclusivity. But when we go to the playground, when we go to birthday parties, or when we go visit even relatives, not everybody is included. And it's heartbreaking for me to see this happening, and to know that it's something as simple as learning the language, and taking, as much interest and passionate about it as I have, to develop that connection and that bond that is absolutely essential for everybody to thrive in society, whether you're hearing or deaf. You need to have that connection through communication and language. So that's where my next step, my focus is on.
And one of the things, like, over the years, I've taken the Carter to lots of birthday parties with hearing classmates. And I use it as a teaching moment with the children, with the hearing children, because they'll say to me, well, why doesn't Carter talk? And I said, well, he does talk. He just uses a different language than you and me. And he uses, he signs, he uses American Sign Language. And then I'll show some basic signs that are applicable to a birthday, like pizza or cake or happy birthday. And I said, Carter does talk. He just uses a different language than we do. So, like, we need to get away from this concept or thought that, communication is only oral, because that's not true. Obviously, we're communicating. People are communicating very effectively, very articulately right now in American Sign Language. So communication is not only oral. But I guess I'll direct. I may, you're the president of the Alberta Association of the Deaf. One of the things we really need to do province-wide in all provinces is really, really leverage Carter's case to bring positive change in your province and all provinces. And I would help lobby our government to have the people who did the discrimination against Carter brought to account, because right now we are not getting any support from anybody on that. We are fighting that battle alone here in Newfoundland to try to get accountability of these people. And quite honestly, we're just being ignored. So we need more support from your association and all the other provincial associations and the Canadian Association of the Deaf to demand that the people in my province who did this to Carter and are continuing to do this to other deaf children are brought accountable, and that there's consequences. Because right now it's just Todd and Kim alone, again, fighting this battle.
And I think to add to your question, with Jonathan now starting the next.
Sorry, just to make sure that I'm understanding in terms of, so curriculum, is it only for for deaf students, or for the system, for the board as an entire system to have that curriculum? Are there teachers that are available to teach these hearing students? There are particular licenses and requirements to make sure that they are qualified teachers to be in that role and in that position. So there does need to be, some discussion on, before we add that, the curriculum class, do we have the resources to be able to do that? Are we able to hire the teachers to do that? Is there an appropriate screening? I don't know if there's, if it's, will there be a long line of 2,000 to 3,000 applicants that are, interested and qualified to do it? So that type of, there needs to be some pre-work done before that is able to be offered. And if there's a curriculum, it would give power to the deaf and for hiring teachers.
I think in Canada, we do vote for the people who are on school boards. They're trustees. So we don't see any deaf people at that level.
You're
So
right.
it's hearing people who are making all the decisions. And just to add to that, there are deaf people that have sent different letters to different boards. And so in moving forward, what we need to do is use this case that, outlines what Kim and Todd have done. And so whether they're former itinerant teachers, like you think of Linda Cundy in Alberta, she was an itinerant teacher, and she has a lot of experience and knowledge. And I think that she's somebody who can help make our case stronger. So we really need to work collaboratively with people who have the knowledge.
Great. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And then we're going to move on to the final question, and then we're going to wrap up. We have to, because the interpreters were only booked until 5, and we're already going over time. So I want to just make sure that Carla has a chance to ask her question. Okay, go ahead. You're set up now, Carla.
Hi there. Thank you. So I attended a deaf school, the Saskatchewan. Sorry, Carla, just a minute. Would you mind coming more into screen, please? We're having a hard time seeing what you're saying. Thank you very much. Okay, great. So I'm a former student of the Saskatchewan School for the Deaf, and I attended an oral program. I did not have hearing aids at the time. I had hearing aids, but no implants. And I moved to a different school at the age of 13. And it was there where I had the opportunity to learn ASL and sign language, and in language of instruction. I grew up with hearing, or with deaf peers. And it was nice because there was my children are all hearing, but they were all ridiculed in school because mom was deaf. And there was the assumption that, deaf people couldn't do things, even though we were communicating with sign language. But it's important that school boards recognize that providing sign language is a necessity for deaf students. Just because I can't hear, I cannot hear. I don't use my hearing aids at all, so I'm unable to hear. And I became completely deaf at the age of 40. But I have seen the experience of many mainstream students feel defeated and feel left out, isolated and lonely. And Carla, you're freezing. Just wanted to let you know. And that experience happens as oh, am I clear now? Okay, you're better now.
You're back. Yeah. Okay.
And oftentimes parents aren't given a lot of options on what appropriate decisions to make. And sometimes if they're not given the appropriate options or tools, it can lead to a lifetime of frustration for deaf learners. Now we are starting to be able to provide feedback. We have interpreters in classrooms. But there are still a lot of students that are unable to understand what is happening because they don't have access to appropriate communication, and they don't understand ASL at a proficient level. So I think that there does need to be more opportunity to learn.
Thank you for that, Carla. Kim and Todd, did you have anything you wanted to add? If not, then I think we have run out of time for our panel today. I want to thank everyone.
I'll say one last thing. Just once again, thank you so much for giving us the platform to be able to talk about Carter's story and the hearing that we went through with him, and give us the opportunity to be able to talk about this. We are both on Facebook, Deaf Children Matter. If anyone does want to reach out to us, if there's any questions that they would like to send us, or if they want to contact us, they can certainly reach us there on Deaf Children Matter. As well, this past week, of course, was International Week of the Deaf. So we'd like to say Happy International Week of the Deaf to all of you. And thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. There's a few things that I want to say here, just in terms of the social isolation that children in inclusive education experience. That when I think back to my grandmother, she didn't sign. She grew up using whatever speech she had and writing back and forth, and would depend on other family members who could finger spell some basics. So when we think about that side of the story, and then my mom herself is deaf. So my grandma being oral, you know, they had told my grandmother that, oh no, you should not use sign language. You should only use the oral approach. And so that's what she did with my mom. And then with me, my grandmother didn't change, but I was able to learn sign language. And I remember being really mad with my grandmother. I was like, why are you forcing me to try to speech read? And why you don't want me to socialize in the deaf community? And I'm just going to end up being isolated. And she said, well, no, I don't want you to be isolated. I want you to be able to go between both worlds. And, you know, she's my grandmother, so I respected what she had to say. And then, so then fast forward to my children, my oldest being born deaf. We all got together at Chuck E. Cheese. I remember that very, very well. It was a family gathering. And this is the first time that my grandmother was meeting her great grandson. And her first reaction was she just immediately burst into tears. And she's like, oh, I should have learned ASL so long ago. I apologize. And she repeatedly apologized to me. And I said, you know what, Grandma, it's not your fault. Just apologies are not necessary. It's because of the medical system. They told you that you should not teach my mom to use sign language. So things are changing. And so I think that now what we see in your case, Kim and Todd, is that the medical system is just having such a sway or an impact on parents in terms of what decision they can make for their child. They're encouraged to use more of an oral method or to use devices. And so even 40, 50 years later, we still have work to do. We need to partner. There needs to be unity. And if there isn't unity, then we're not going to succeed. So and then finally, and I am going to wrap this up, I just want to thank you, Kim and Todd, for participating in this panel here this afternoon. And I also want to thank Kristen and Travis, who are also our panelists here today. And we will post Todd and Kim's, post onto Todd and Kim's Facebook page, Deaf Children Matter. And so you can check the posting there and there'll be a transcript as well, which will be posted. And then for any of the participants, if you joined later on, we are recording this and it is going to be posted to YouTube. So if there's anything that you missed because you weren't able to join right at the beginning, you can check that out on YouTube. And then finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you very much to our two special guests, Kim and Todd. And thank you to the interpreters for working with us this afternoon. And thank you to Toronto Metropolitan University, who's covering the cost of the interpretation services today. And with that, I think I will stop recording. Bye-bye, everyone.